Welcome to today's Midwife Live Talk with Midwife Karin Siegler and today guest Katy Megson. And today's session will be recorded, as you just heard. I just want to say that at the beginning. Today's topic is pelvic floor health and pregnancy and postpartum. The whole session will last around 1 hour. We will try to finish on time, rather than having a presentation in the beginning and then a Q&A at the end. We want this to be as interactive as possible. So please ask questions either in the chat or switch on your microphone or your camera as well. And Katy will answer all your questions. She is a women's and pelvic health physiotherapist. And I know her from her time when she was still practicing here in Hong Kong. She was my physio, and now she's currently based in Dubai. Thank you so much for joining us. Karin, just to let you know, Karin is a midwife of 28 years, and I'm the moderator usually in those live talks. My name is Anna, and I'm a mother of 2. So Katy, thanks so much for joining us today. And I already want to start with my first question, which is, how did you end up in this area of work?
I get asked this question all the time. So I was one of the physios that I basically came into physiotherapy knowing I wanted to do women's and pelvic health. And I think I went through this whole journey of like maybe wanting to do medicine and then looking at midwifery. And then I actually came across an article about women's and pelvic health physio. And I was like, that feels perfect for me. Like, it's exactly what I want. And so I did my physio degree in the UK, and then I worked in the NHS and did my rotations around all the different fields, because it's kind of always recommended to have like more of an understanding of the different areas of physio. And then as soon as I possibly could, I went into women's and pelvic health. There's actually the best amount of evidence for physiotherapy in this field. So we know that it really, really works. There's really brilliant evidence for it. And it's just so satisfying because I get to work with women at the most special parts of their life on pre and post pregnancy, also working with women kind of preconception and all the way up into menopause and beyond. And often the people tell me things that they wouldn't have told their like closest friends or partners. And it's just so satisfying to be able to help these women. And so I really love my job. I think I'm really lucky that I found this little niche.
And you know what?
That sounds great.
I can really tell that you love your job. You know,
Aww.
when I saw you, it's just so inspiring. And yeah, I can imagine that you are making such a huge difference to so many women in their lives. So thanks so much for what you do. I actually had no clue that there was something called, first of all, a pelvic floor. Never heard of that before I got pregnant. And then secondly, the profession, the job of being a women's and pelvic health physiotherapist. So that whole world opened up once I hit that I guess phase in my life. So very, very interesting. Karin, do you want to start with maybe another question?
Yes. I would like to know, Katy, what do you think about seeing a physio during pregnancy? So in case there is no issues, no challenges, do you think it makes sense to do maybe 1 or 2 consultations with a physio? Because we all know a physio is quite expensive in Hong Kong. Is it better to save the money for later on, postnatally or after birth? Or would you suggest doing a visit before childbirth? As a midwife, I remember many, many years ago, we said a strong pelvic floor always slow down childbirth. So it's not so important doing a physio before or doing pelvic floor training before childbirth. Better save it for later on. But I think this is not accurate anymore. What do you think, Katy?
Yeah, it is difficult because it is expensive. So obviously in an ideal world, everyone would have access to physio through pregnancy. And then I would recommend coming in the first trimester and just doing like a basic checkup of your pelvic floor, deep abdominal muscles to hopefully prevent any aches and pains like pelvic girdle pain, low back pain. Discuss kind of your exercise regime, so what you're already doing pre-pregnancy and whether we need to make any modifications through the course of the pregnancy. And then to discuss any pelvic floor symptoms that might already have arisen before pregnancy. It's always easier to address things before pregnancy progresses. And then what I would say is if you're someone that doesn't really have any symptoms at all, to kind of come in the first trimester, come then maybe like mid-pregnancy around 20 weeks, and then in the third trimester come a little bit more regularly from 34 weeks when we can do some more birth prep. Now, if you don't have access to that, there is lots of information now online. There's books. I'm creating some ebooks which can hopefully help people through that initial phase if they're not having access to physio. But I definitely think having at least one session can be super helpful, because if you've never connected to your pelvic floor muscles before and then you come post-pregnancy, it's going to be so much harder to kind of get on with that and kind of find that brain neuromuscular connection. Whereas if you've had that feedback in pregnancy, it just means that you progress so much quicker afterwards. And I do really notice a difference with the people I worked with during pregnancy. When they come back, they just do progress quicker. And so I would always recommend it, but I know it is tough with insurance and stuff. What I would say as well about the pelvic floor exercises is there's some really good evidence that having good pelvic floor muscle tone can help with that second stage of labor, because the more tone that we have through the pelvic floor, as baby's head hits the pelvic floor, it helps it turn just before delivery. And also having that awareness of what your pelvic floor is doing in space also improves the range of movement to help with pushing as well. So there's lots of things we can do around that to help labor be more effective, hopefully.
So you would recommend at least one visit during pregnancy?
At an absolute minimum, I would recommend one.
Okay. Great.
You can kind of, if you can only come once, you can say that in a session. So you can say, like, I'm only able to come once, and then we can give you as much as possible in that session. And obviously then we can advise and signpost to different resources. And I'm always happy to answer DMs and things like that as well.
Lovely.
Yeah, thank you, Katy. And I think what Karen was kind of hinting at is that if you exercise it very much, your pelvic floor, and then maybe you're, in a way, maybe, I don't know what the right word would be, but maybe like too crampy, to kind of open during the opening phase. But I think nowadays, just as there is an emphasis on strengthening and contracting your pelvic floor muscles, I think especially towards the end of pregnancy, now there's more knowledge about also having to practice the release and the opening and the softening of the pelvic floor, and maybe that's the key, right? To avoiding any slowing down during the opening phase, I could imagine.
Absolutely. We're in this really interesting place where people are becoming more informed about pelvic floor muscles and pelvic floor exercises, and people are kind of on board with it a bit more. But you're right that there can be like the opposite, where we are too active through the pelvic floor, and that can also be problematic. And I like to recommend things like apps for people to kind of do pelvic floor exercises and keep compliant. But often I find those apps encourage you to do the pelvic floor so quickly, and they don't always encourage that full relaxation. And we do, of course, need the relaxation just as much as the strength itself. And so in pregnancy, the focus is always on maintaining that full range of movement. And so if you imagine that this is the base down here, you want to be able to lift all the way up to the top, but then you also need to be able to relax fully down as well. So it's just giving yourself that slowness and time to really connect and make sure you have that full range of movement.
Are there any exercises that you would say to avoid from a physio perspective in pregnancy?
So this is really individual. So there's so many benefits to exercise in pregnancy. There is things that we're going to have to modify. And in terms of contraindications, you just always need to discuss that with your midwife or OBGYN, and they will let you know if they have any specific precautions or contraindications to exercise. But for the vast majority of people, exercise is really important, both for you and the development of baby. As your body changes, there are things that we need to take into account. So one of the most common ones is your bump. So as bump starts to show between kind of 16 weeks or maybe earlier, if it's a subsequent pregnancy, we do need to change the way we do abdominal exercise. And that's to avoid too much pressure down the midline of the tummy around the belly button. Now, the exercises that you can or can't do are going to be different for everyone. And so it's always nice to kind of see how someone's moving, have a look at their core control, and then give more specific advice. And what you might be able to do one week might be absolutely fine, but then the next week as bump grows, you might not be able to do that same exercise in the same way. So it does need to kind of have to learn like how to assess your abs yourself. But as a gold standard, I'd say no traditional ab exercises like crunches, planks, press ups, this kind of thing, from basically as you notice bump. So usually around that 16-week mark, or slightly earlier if it's second or third pregnancy.
How about side planks?
Yeah, good question. Side planks are fine. So side planks are really,
Fine.
really you want to work those obliques. They're super important. It might be that doing a full side plank is quite difficult. So maybe one on the elbows. But yeah, side planks are perfect.
Lovely. Let's talk about childbirth. Position for childbirth. From a physio perspective, are there any positions during childbirth which are better for your pelvic floor, less tearing and less stress on the pelvic floor? Or you say, no, actually, it doesn't matter, just go with the flow, and what you feel like is good for you, that's fine for the pelvic floor.
Yeah, so the best position is always one that's changed every 20 to 30 minutes. And so I know you're really pro being active during pregnancy and trying to use gravity. And yeah, I totally agree. It's all so important. In terms of positions I'd recommend, it's always dependent on the stage of labor. So I don't have my pelvis model today, which is super annoying. But if you imagine the pelvis, we have different points in the pelvis. So at the top of the pelvis, we have the pelvic inlet. And this pelvis part is widest from side to side, so widthways. If we move further down the pelvis, we have the mid pelvis, and this is widest on a diagonal. And then at the bottom of the pelvis, the pelvic outlet, it's actually widest front to back. So as your baby makes its way down the birth canal, we actually want to change the positions that you're in to kind of navigate all those bony parts in the pelvis. And so for like as a general rule, in the first stage of labor, I'd say you want positions where your knees and hips are super open. So being on a birth ball is really helpful, something like a deep squat, in a kneeling position with the knees wide. As we get into that mid pelvis area, that's usually around the transitional stage. So when you're about 8 to 10 centimeters. And at
That's
this
the really hard one. That's the really hard phase.
Yeah. And also you're probably so tired, right? You're exhausted, you've been there for a while, especially if it's your first pregnancy or first delivery. And so we're wanting positions that are basically asymmetric. So maybe having one knee slightly higher than the other, like using a yoga block or a peanut ball. And we want rotation, we want asymmetry. And that's to help that kind of shift in that mid pelvis. And then as we come to the pushing stage, we're thinking about that pelvic outlet being widest from front to back. And so we actually want the opposite. We want positions where the knees are in and the feet are out to widen the outlet. And so usually like a kneeling position with the knees slightly in and the feet out, or if you're on a hospital bed, kind of having the bed upright on all fours and leaning over the back of the bed. Or you can try like a sideline position with peanut ball support as well. So yeah, the positions I would recommend are basically to depend on the stage of labor. And in terms of the pelvic floor, using gravity can be really, really helpful. And that's why in pregnancy, when we do birth prep, we always encourage to practice the pushing in different positions, like all fours, like side lying, so that you feel really confident that you're able to do that in whatever position you end up in.
Yeah, and I saw Katy a couple times postnatally with my first child, and then a couple times prenatally with my second child. And leading up to, closer to labor, we actually practiced some of these birthing positions. And I thought that was so valuable because before that I had looked at them like on a piece of paper in a picture. But then I feel like when you're in such a crazy situation like childbirth, I had two very positive birth experiences, but still, like it's crazy, right? It's not your everyday experience. Then it's really hard to just come up with like, what was that picture? And having had just practiced and gone through some of those positions was so valuable, because then I could just recall them in the moment. But actually also when I hit transition and then the pushing phase, I just felt my body, what my body wanted to do, and I just followed my body's cue in a way. But it's so great to have all this information. I mean, it's really fantastic. What did
Lovely.
And do you mind sharing like which positions you ended up delivering in? When you said you listened to your body, like what was your body telling you?
I wanted to lie on my side. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to lie on my side. I did a lot of meditation during birth prep and then also during labor, and I just loved lazing around. But I just wanted to stay where I was and then turned onto my side. That just felt the right thing to do. So yeah.
Lovely. Katy, epidural and pelvic floor. There are two different opinions. So one opinion says epidural is very good for your pelvic floor because it's soft and it relaxes the pelvic floor, and this is something what will not stress your pelvic floor a lot. Also, sometimes I see as a midwife working in the labor ward that an epidural usually slows down the pushing phases a lot, and women are in one position for a very long time, and they have much or way longer pushing phases than a woman without an epidural. And this also leads to a higher water retention, swelling, stress on the pelvic floor. From a physio perspective, what is your opinion on epidural pelvic floor pro and con?
It's such an interesting one, and it's something I've changed my own opinion of in the last few years. So I used to, from a personal perspective, I mean, I also haven't ever been pregnant or delivered a baby, so maybe my opinion would change. But I was always quite anti the idea of an epidural because you wouldn't be able to feel the pushing, and therefore you wouldn't be able to feel that let go and that connection with the pelvic floor. And like you said, it can slow down labor, and so it might mean that you're then pushing for a longer period of time and putting quite a lot of that pressure on the pelvic floor without being able to feel it. But there's been some evidence come out in the last few years, and one of them is basically about like a less epidural. So like the walking epidurals or the mobile epidurals, and there's some really, really good evidence that they can actually reduce your risk of perineal tears, particularly in a first vaginal delivery. And because it's a lesser amount of the epidural, you're able to be more active, so you can still use gravity a bit more easily. And so now I'm actually thinking like maybe using a mobile epidural is the way to go if you have more active pelvic floor and you struggle with that relaxation, and maybe that would be protective. But I'm going on a course again in November when there's going to be some more research discussed, so maybe I will have more info then, but that's kind of my thoughts at the moment on it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I just talking about walking epidural. We had the topic epidural, Anna, in one of our previous talks. I think it sounds amazing, walking epidural. I can walk around, I'm without pain, I can use gravity. Actually, that's not the fact. Women need to be aware, even with a walking epidural, you're just allowed to use the bathroom with support because the legs are not carrying your full weight. And out of liability insurance issues, you're not allowed and you cannot walk around. You're just more mobile on your bed and moving right and left side. So, okay, but so I see you're also a little bit in between. There are some positive ideas about epidural, and also something about the long pushing phases, which can lead to a more stressed epidural, a pelvic floor.
Yeah, so maybe I need to change the terminology and call it a mobile epidural. And actually, like, I have probably come across it written as a mobile epidural in more recent times. So maybe we're trying to change the words on that to people think that they're not going into it and being able to walk around the room. It's a good point.
Yeah, because walking epidural, you kind of assume you can still just walk around. That was my assumption before my first labor. And yeah, but yeah, I could talk about this forever, but yeah, today's topic is not epidural, it's pelvic floor. And we actually have one participant question. She's asking, I had the epidural, which was not walking epidural, and then a catheter? No, I'm not sure I'm saying this right. And I believe the catheter really did damage and cause incontinence. I don't know, you two are the experts.
Katy, do you want to start?
I would say that obviously for having an epidural, you would need to have a catheter. And there can be cases where sometimes it can bruise and cause a little bit of irritation around that urethra, but that's normally something that should improve quite quickly. So I guess if there'd been like a bit more disruption to those tissues, there might be more swelling and bruising, and that can then cause you to not feel as connected to that front part of your pelvic floor that wraps around the urethra. But as such, should be something that we'd be able to resolve or improve with some physio. So it's just tissues that should take time to heal. But Karen, I don't know if there's anything else you want to say about the catheters.
No, I agree. Yeah, first, hi Valentina, and hi from Nigeria. This is very nice having one listener from West Africa. The epidural and catheter during childbirth, this is usually connected together because many women are not in control of the urine bladder. The catheter normally, if it's just occasionally in a very short time for 2 or 3 days or just for a couple of hours, like during childbirth, usually do not cause incontinence. This is something if people really have to deal with a catheter for weeks or months. But I remember, Valentina, your baby was quite a chubby one. The pelvic floor was a little bit stressed during a pregnancy as well, and you had a long childbirth. I think this is something you can really improve with physio and training, pelvic floor training to strengthen it again. So I don't think it's related to the catheter. I think it's more related to a weak pelvic floor because of a long birth, heavy baby during pregnancy. And I think this issue needs to be addressed.
My next question would be, Katy, do you see a connection or a higher rate of urinary incontinence and vaginal deliveries? I think we have to be a little bit careful on this topic, but would you say you see this a little bit more common, or also in women that have cesarean labors?
Interesting. So as Karen said, like anyone that's pregnant has that exposure to pregnancy hormones, which will change the muscle tone and function of the pelvic floor. And we've carried baby weight and extra fluid and all of that stuff on top of the pelvic floor for 9 months. So regardless of the type of delivery, we still do need to do some good targeted pelvic floor rehab afterwards. After delivery, vaginally, your pelvic floor muscles will be stretched up to 2.5 times their original length. So there will be more localized trauma and bruising at those muscles, which is something that we'll want to improve afterwards. So I'd say in the first 3 months after delivery, I would see more incontinence with a vaginal delivery via a C-section. But after a C-section, often what I find is that those muscles are actually overactive. And that could be that because we're trying to protect the scar and the wound, and that there's weakness through that lower abdominal area, often the pelvic floor muscles kind of tense up a little bit to almost try to give a bit of protection. When the pelvic floor muscles are overactive or tight, there's not as much movement, there's not as much mobility. And sometimes that can actually cause incontinence as well. Because when you're active, when you're sneezing, coughing, we don't have that ability of the pelvic floor to move and support the organs. And so we can see incontinence post C-section as well. In the data that I've seen, and I haven't looked at this in the last few months, but later down the line, so when we're talking like post-menopause, the rates of incontinence are the same for C-section and vaginal deliveries. So definitely in the first few months, that would be more incontinence following a vaginal delivery, but we know that later down the line, actually, it's pretty much the same. So we still need to do your rehab, unfortunately.
Perfect. Postnatal. Sorry, Anna, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, yeah, interestingly, I had a hyperactive, is that the right term, pelvic floor after my first delivery, and that was an emergency cesarean. And this is something I never thought would, it never crossed my mind that you could have a too strong pelvic floor that causing problems. I always knew of like the incontinence part, or like that's what I had heard of, and other, and other problems down that track. But I was like, what? You can have a hyperactive pelvic floor? You mean my pelvic floor is especially good? No, it turned out not to be a very nice thing either. So maybe could you tell us a little bit about typical problems that could have, that women might experience that have a too weak or too strong pelvic floor, like typical symptoms?
So we have to think of it as a group of muscles, just like any other muscle in the body. So for example, thinking of it like your bicep. So you could have a bicep that's a little bit weak, that's not going to support the shoulder and elbow joints as much. And you could also have a bicep muscle that's too tight, that's going to cause discomfort because it's kind of on all the time. And the pelvic floor muscles are exactly the same. So in pelvic floors that are overactive, that usually the symptoms that we see are like discomfort with sex, discomfort with inserting a tampon, or difficulty being able to insert a tampon or have sex, overactive bladder, so feeling that you need to go to a toilet very quickly and not being able to make it in time. We can also experience incontinence as well, because that pelvic floor doesn't have as much mobility, particularly in people that are super active. So athletes, gymnasts, people that do CrossFit, it can be quite common to find leakage with those overactive pelvic floor muscles. Sometimes it can also display itself with hip pain, pelvic pain, more generalized pain around that area, because often the other muscles surrounding the pelvis are more active as well. So it's often not just the pelvic floor we need to work on, but globally through the pelvis. On the other side of things, if the pelvic floor is weaker and there's a bit less tone at rest there, then we're more likely to experience symptoms like incontinence and urgency, and things like difficulty emptying the bladder and bowel, because the pelvic floor muscle isn't able to support those areas as well. So there's a whole host of symptoms, unfortunately, and so we've got to try and find the balance to be somewhere in the middle. But I think often we think like having a pelvic floor that's overactive is a good thing, but like you've said, actually an overactive pelvic floor still can be weak underneath. So it's like a tight muscle, but if we take away the tightness, the muscle's still weak. So we have to work on both things.
Thank you, Katy. Urinary incontinence after childbirth. For how long can you consider it's okay, or it's okay to wait? And when would you recommend really to have hands-on and to see by somebody and to work on it? And in case I don't go in time and see a physio with urinary incontinence, is it a problem then later on, or can I start pelvic floor training anytime, or do I miss something and then it's so severe then I need more help for that?
So we never say that incontinence is normal, because it's not something that we want to put up with. Like, it's not a pleasant symptom, and it has such a big impact on quality of life, whether that's working life, social life, intimate relationship life. Like, it's just not a pleasant symptom. And so we always try and say it's common, but it's not normal. And it is common because 1/3 of women during their lifetime will experience incontinence. In terms of postpartum, it is really common in the first couple of days, because of all of that bruising and swelling, and you're just not feeling as connected to that part of your body as you would do normally. So I wouldn't get super down and worried if you're experiencing at that point. I'd talk to the midwife on the ward. If you have access to a postnatal physio on the ward as well, then it's always good to have a chat with them if you're noticing it straight away. But I would get started with some pelvic connection exercises, and that's not going away and doing like loads of holds. Like Anna said, you don't want to end up with a pelvic floor that's on all the time, but definitely starting some connection breathing. So just drawing on with the pelvic floor, letting go. And then also thinking about bladder habits. So like, what are you drinking? Are you listening to the bladder urges? So often in those first couple of days, like there's just so much going on and it's so overwhelming that you're so bothered about baby and everything else that you'll often kind of delay the need to go or not really listen to your own bladder urges. And so making sure that you're just trying to go when you get the urge to go, thinking about staying hydrated, but not overly drinking either. And then just, like I said, communicating with the staff on the wards. If you go home and you're still noticing symptoms, then I would go and see a physio. You can't go too soon. So we can't do anything internal to assess the pelvic floor muscles until 6 weeks, just because of infection risk. But there's still a lot we can do beforehand. So I think if you're worried about symptoms, then get in touch with a physio. You can even do an online consult just to talk about your bladder habits, and just to cue some pelvic floor exercises that are a bit more specific. And then at 6 weeks, I would go and have an internal exam so we can make everything a bit more specific to your pelvic floor. What I would say is that what I do notice is lots of women will have little symptoms like stress incontinence only when they're unwell, or stress incontinence only when they've got a full bladder and they've been jumping on a trampoline. And they're just like, oh, that's just part of, being a mom and having had babies, and they kind of don't really do anything about it. But then when we enter perimenopause and menopause, sometimes those symptoms can worsen and it can become more incontinence with an urge, and it can become more problematic. And at that point, we can still train a pelvic floor, of course, but it's much easier to do it earlier when we've got lots of estrogen and we're feeling more connected to that part of the body than wait and put up with the symptoms for decades and then try and do something about it later. So I would always encourage people to come and get help.
And in case I don't have the time, or I'm not into pelvic floor training at all, up to which degree would the pelvic floor recover by itself? If I don't want to do anything, or I'm not doing anything after childbirth, so what would you say, up to 70%, 90%? I know it's difficult to give me a number, but what's the idea about recovering by itself?
It's a really good question, and it's different for stress incontinence and urge incontinence. I don't have a stat for urge incontinence. So that's incontinence when you're feeling like you need to get to the toilet, but you're not able to quite get there in time. Whereas stress incontinence is the leakage when you sneeze, cough, laugh, run, do something active, and there's that increase in intra-abdominal pressure. And so pelvic floor muscle training can be effective for 60% of people with stress incontinence, but it has to be super specific. So we need to assess your pelvic floor. We need to make sure you're using the right part of your pelvic floor because it's actually 10 different muscles. So it's not just one muscle. And we need to make it progressive, and we need to be really consistent and compliant with it for at least 4 months and potentially even a little bit longer. So it's not something that's super easy. Like, it does have to be the right time. And I can completely understand that, like, straight after birth, it's not always the time when you can put that energy into recovering yourself. So there are other options as well. Depending on the type of incontinence and depending on the type of mechanism. There are things called pessaries, which are like little silicone devices that we insert into the vagina and basically help to splint the vagina open. And they provide a little bit more support to the urethra and the bladder at the front. And they can be really helpful for stress incontinence. And of course, there's also surgeries. Surgery is a valid option, but it has to be at the right time of your life. And if you're considering having other children and other pregnancies, then often it's something that it's usually better to delay until you've kind of completed your family. So there are all these options available. I will be writing an ebook on this as well for self-management. So for people that aren't able to see someone face-to-face, or they don't have a budget for face-to-face physio, it will have kind of like all of these options available and hopefully be able to talk you through what you can do. So yeah, trying to make it a bit more accessible, because I know it can be hard to find the time to get to an in-person physio.
Yes.
Lovely.
And we've got another question from the audience. Can you get pelvic floor issues post-pregnancy if you have a C-section? Is it different issues?
Yeah, you can. They can be the same issues. So with a C-section, like, you've still carried baby weight for 9 months and you've still had the exposure to pregnancy hormones. And so there will be changes to your pelvic floor anyway. Also, it depends like what you've done during pregnancy. And so if you are someone that always has like a weak bladder, and you always felt like you were going to the toilet lots at school or at work, and then you've got pregnant, then definitely that can be you're probably going to have more of an incidence of having symptoms afterwards. So unfortunately, it's not completely protective. In terms of things like prolapse, vaginal delivery is more of a risk factor. And so having a C-section is slightly protective for prolapse, but there's still other pelvic floor issues that you can have, unfortunately.
I had another question. I especially on social media, if you're a mom, you suddenly get pushed or weird videos on Instagram and similar. And one I had to really laugh about was about the postnatal poo. Do you have any tips for that very first poo after childbirth? Apparently, a lot of women struggle with that one.
Yes, and I think it's so important to talk about, because I think it can be a really traumatizing thing if you've just gone through a delivery and everything's feeling super sore and bruised, and then you try and go for a poo and it's an uncomfortable experience. Like, it can be, yeah, it can not be a good time. So what I would recommend is staying hydrated. So 70% of stool is water. And so you're going to be dehydrated following birth. And if you're not drinking enough, that stool is going to be harder, and then it's going to be more difficult to go. So have your water in your pack for the hospital, and make sure it's filled up regularly and it's by your bedside and you're taking regular sips, and ask your partner to fill it up for you regularly and encourage you to drink. The other thing I'd say is that it's normal for it to take a couple of days. So it's a bit like being on a long haul flight. Your bowels are super sensitive. And so it's normal for it to take a couple of days to get that urge to go. But when you do get the urge, try to go with it and not delay it. Because if you're kind of distracted with things with baby, or you're just like, oh, I don't really want to go, it's not a good time, then what happens is the stool moves further back up the rectum and we absorb more water from it. And then again, it's a little bit more dehydrated and it's a little bit harder to go. So go when you get the urge, get yourself in a really good, comfortable position on the toilet. Ideally, you want to use a stool or even just a toilet paper underneath each foot to bring your knees a little bit higher up than your hips. And you want to be kind of leaning forwards in a nice, comfortable forward lean position. And you want to basically, it sounds silly, but breathe. And so instead of doing lots of straining down below, you want to do some nice waist widening breathing. So you're taking a big breath in through your nose, widening your waist out to the back and the sides, and out through your mouth. And you'd maybe do 3 or 4 of those waist widening breaths, and then just a gentle push down. Now, if you've had a C-section, I would roll up a towel and have it in like a big cylindrical shape, and get someone to sellotape it at either end for you, or just hold it. And I would place that like right over your wound when you're opening your bowels. Now, your stitches are lovely and strong, but it's going to feel much more comfortable to empty your bowels with that little gentle pressure there. Similarly, if you've had a perineal tear, then you probably want to also give yourself a bit of support. So just wrap your hand in a bit of toilet paper or use a clean sanitary pad and just use the heel of your hand to put an upwards pressure over the perineum as you empty your bowel. And again, it just gives your wound a little bit more support and it will just feel way more comfortable. And that's my advice really, other than just also like sticking to 3 regular meals a day. So after delivery, often you want a snack and just you're not really worried about properly meal times, but your bowels are so sensitive. And so having the 3 regular meals a day can be really helpful to get your bowels back in that routine. And of course you can snack in between. And then just making sure you're getting a good amount of fiber. So like nuts, chia seeds, nice amount of fruit and veg, just to help your bowels as well, particularly if you're prone to constipation in pregnancy.
Thank you so much,
Hopefully that
Katy.
makes you feel a bit more comfortable.
That was such a good answer. I didn't know any of this. It's amazing. Thank you. Karen, did you have another question?
Yes, pelvic floor training postnatally. In Germany, we encourage women to work with the pelvic floor. We have exercise. We guide them through different exercises, strengthen the pelvic floor, holding the pelvic floor, feeling the different layers. So it's always very boring exercises, and they take long time. The French women, they do it easier. They have the biofeedback machine, and they see a physio, and then they see a machine that works a little bit like a TENS machine. And there are many different options about these 2 different way of re-education the pelvic floor. One looks like it takes a long time, it's very tiring, very boring, and the other one is quick, more efficient, and way better. What is your opinion on this?
Good question. We don't have enough evidence to tell us at the moment what the best way of training the pelvic floor muscles is. What we do know is that it has to be it has to be individualized. And so it needs to be specific to your pelvic floor. So me just standing here and saying, do these exercises this many times a day, everyone, isn't going to be good enough. And the other thing we know is that it has to be regular. So we have to be really consistent with it 3 times a day in the first 3 months. And then for 3 or 4 months. So they're the 2 things that we do know. Then in terms of the technique, I think it really just is on like the preference of your clinician and also the patient's preference. Now, my thoughts are that using electrical stimulation like the French do it's just a bit too much. I think after that part of your body has been through so much and there's still that bruising and swelling down below, potentially some stitches healing, having a probe put into the vagina and then having that electrical impulse, it can be quite uncomfortable and it can actually sometimes make your pelvic floor muscles almost a bit too active. My second thought with that is that you don't learn how to do it on your own. So it's very passive. You're I know some of the, like with biofeedback, when I use it, I always encourage people to try and contract the pelvic floor at the same time that the machine does. But you are kind of relying on the machine to give you that feedback. And it's not particularly functional for them when you're out and about in your day-to-day life or you're getting back into sport, because you're not going to have that biofeedback machine with you then. And then the final thought on it is, if you've got your probe in the vagina, your vagina or your pelvic floor muscles can't work the full range of movement because there's something there stopping them. So you're only strengthening into like half of that range of movement. And so that's the other thing that I would be kind of wary about, is that it's a bit like your bicep. We want to strengthen it all the way through the range of movement and not just this little bit here. So they're my thoughts. However, if I have a patient, you're asking a question I have so many opinions on. If I have a patient that's not able to use their pelvic floor, so there's just no connection, or it's very minimum, like it's just like they're getting a flicker, but they're not getting a proper lift of the pelvic floor, or they can't feel it at all, then I will use it because it helps with that brain neuromuscular connection. But I definitely don't do it as gold standard for everyone. But that's, again, we don't have the evidence. That's just my preference.
Okay.
If I have a woman that comes in and they've bought a device or they've used it before, then I will always use it, because I think, then you bought it and you want to use it, and then that's totally fine, but I wouldn't overly encourage it.
I always had the feeling women, they stick longer to the biofeedback exercise or electric stimulation, because maybe it's easier to do it. You go somewhere, you lie down, it's something, you can relax, you have some time for yourself. Why doing the normal pelvic floor muscle exercises, it's so boring. And honestly, it's very hard to see client really going through these 3 times a day. You have a baby at home, you have to do it every day. So many women give up, and you do it on your own at home. There's nobody who push you. And maybe this is why my feeling sometimes was the electric stimulation is a little bit more, it's faster and more efficient, but also it is very expensive, and not everyone can get it or can have it because it's too expensive. So yes, I also see it's a very different approach. And I know in France, the insurance pays for it, so there's a easier access to that. And so I found it quite positive, but I completely understand what you're saying with the full range of movement and just reacting to it and not understanding the connection and activating the pelvic floor from my side. And yeah, that makes definitely sense. But it's a very interesting research to see what is more effective, what works faster. So yes,
That's a
thank
really
you,
good
Katy.
point. And I totally understand that, like with motivation, like that some people will buy a device because it feels like, you know, they got a nice device, they spent money on it, helps motivate them to do it. And then of course, like, let's work with it and we'll use it. I think you're so right about 3 times a day. It's really, really tough. So trying to time it with something that you're already doing. So whether that's when you're breastfeeding, do it then. If you're brushing your teeth, put the toilet seat down, sit down on the toilet seat, do it then. If you're always in a lift, getting in and out of your building, just try and time it with stuff that you're doing. There are apps that you can get that will send reminders to your phone. I post on my Instagram stories every day, like a little reminder, and then I keep stopping them, and then people tell me like, oh, I only do it when I see the story. And so I keep doing that. And so just try to do something that, yeah, fits into your routine.
Lovely, perfect. I think also, yes, we need to connect your Instagram link, and if there are some nice exercises, simple exercises that's connected at the chat group. And yes, getting easier access to good ideas, training the pelvic floor.
Anyone want to ask more questions? Now's your time. Otherwise, Katy, is there something that within your field that you're very passionate about, or something like, I don't know, a message that you want to share with people, or yeah, anything else that you think our listeners would benefit from hearing from you?
I think if I was pregnant for the first time listening to all of this, and I'd never heard about pelvic floor or read about it before, I probably would feel quite overwhelmed because it does sound like a lot. I'd be like, what are these muscles? And like, how do I use them? And when am I meant to do them? And it just probably feels quite overwhelming. So I wonder whether I just talk through like actually how to use them, and maybe I do like a few minutes of practical. Does that work?
Amazing.
So let me just talk briefly then about your pelvic floor muscles. So there are 10 muscles in total, and there's 3 different layers of the pelvic floor. So you have your superficial muscles that you see from the outside. You have a middle layer that wraps around the urethra, and then you have deeper muscles which sit more at the back, which support your pelvic organs, so the bladder, the uterus, and the bowel at the back. All of the muscles attach at your tailbone, and they come through like a sling or a hammock to attach to your pubic bone at the front. And because most of the muscles sit at the back part, most people have more awareness of the back part of the pelvic floor rather than the front. And so we try and start from the back and then lift forwards and upwards to the pubic bone, almost like an aeroplane at the back of the runway coming in that upwards and forwards direction. And so if we practice in sitting now, try and get yourself so that your feet are flat on the floor and your hips are nice and level, so no crossed legs. You might want to pop your hands on your pelvis and just start with some pelvic tilts. So we're just rocking the pelvis backwards and forwards. And I do this not because it's a pelvic floor exercise, but just because it helps you have that awareness of where your pelvis is sitting in space. So after you've done the pelvic floor rocking, you're going to find that middle position. So you're kind of sat up on your tailbone. And I want you to breathe in and just focus on relaxing the tummy and just letting go of any tension that you might feel in your pelvic floor, almost like you're fully relaxing into your underwear and the seat below. As you exhale, I want you to think about stopping any wind at the back. So imagine you're in a waiting room or a lift, you need to pass wind, you're going to stop yourself, and then you're going to lift that through the vagina and all the way through to the front part as if you're stopping the flow of urine up to the pubic bone. And then you're going to breathe in and just let it come all the way back down to that rest again. We go again, so you're going to exhale, back passage, stop any wind, lift through the vagina all the way to the pubic bone at the top, and then breathe in, let go, relax. So this is what we call connection breathing. And what we're doing is we're cueing the breath to the pelvic floor. And the reason we do that is because your diaphragm works in sync with the pelvic floor. So every time you breathe in, the pelvic floor fully relaxes. And every time you breathe out, the pelvic floor lifts upwards and forwards. And so we're just going to practice that once more. So just breathing in, fully let go, relax. And then exhale, stop any wind at the back, lift through the vagina all the way to the pubic bone, stop any urine at the front, and then breathe in, fully let go. Now, if you're feeling that and you feel connected, then you could also try some longer holds where you're going to pause in the middle, hold for up to 10 seconds, and then breathe in and fully let go and make sure you fully will let go again. And you can repeat those until you get tired. And then you can also do some quicker ones where you're focusing on just getting to the top bit pretty quickly and then giving yourself that time to fully relax. But I'd say if the connection stuff feels difficult, then just stick with that. Just do 8 contractions, do it 3 times a day. So mornings, 8 squeezes, middle of the day, 8 squeezes, evening, 8 squeezes. And once that starts to feel comfortable, then you can add in the longer holds. So try and just keep it simple. If you're doing it and you're like moving up and down the chair, you're using your glutes, you're holding your breath, or you're bracing your core, then it's probably more of an indication that it would be a good idea to go and see a physio and just get that feedback. And hopefully they can just give you the confidence, because I think once you have the confidence with this, everything else makes a bit more sense and it feels a bit easier and a bit, hopefully a bit less overwhelming.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Katy. I think from my side, we've covered everything that I can think of at this point in time. Karin, what do you think?
Yes, I think this is a perfect session. And we have one more question from Emma. So when you relax your floor on the inhale, do you let go all at once or back to front? Katy, what is the right technique?
It's a good question, because I've heard other like apps and things tell you to like let go in levels. So they talk about all these levels and stuff, but honestly, just let it go. And often with the let go, you can imagine like a flower opening up all its petals, or you can imagine like melting butter or melting chocolate, just that kind of like soft, gentle let go, if that makes sense. It's quite helpful sometimes to visualize these things. So yeah, just let everything go.
Flower sounds great. Lovely.
This is sometimes the biofeedback can be nice, because you can use machines that like will show you like flowers opening and closing, and like that's quite a nice visualization.
Perfect.
Amazing.
Very helpful.
So incredible. Thank you so much for your valuable time, Katy. I thought this was such an informative session. Amazing. We will have the recording up in our WhatsApp group as well, and feel free to share them. The recording with any friends you that might find this helpful. Also, please, if you liked it, continue to share the link with your friends, and also feel free to give us feedback if you think there's some things that we could do better. And yeah, join us for the upcoming Midwife Live Talks about pregnancy, labor, postpartum, baby care. And Karin and I are thinking our next session will probably be about giving birth in the public sector in Hong Kong. Okay.
Yes, and Katy, just one more topic. Katy, please add your Instagram link and your contact details at the WhatsApp chat group. So if people have a personal question or want to connect with you, just post your details at the chat group.
Perfect. Yeah, super happy to answer anyone's questions. So feel free to get in touch.
Thank you so much, Katy. Lovely.
Okay, bye everybody.
Thanks for
bye
all the
everybody. See you in 2 weeks. Yes, thank you, Katy. Thank you, Anna.
Bye.